Stephen King, my favorite author of all time, the master of horror himself. But did he write any good non-scary stories? Well, my friends, for a guy who has been mainly defined as the master of horror, he has written a ton of non-scary novels and novellas. I'm Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem, and these are my top 10 favorite non-scary Stephen King stories. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem. I'm a composer, now also a booktuber. You can find my music in The Wheel of Time Season 2, His Dark Material Season 3, and the newly released The Hills of Tenchiko, now for your Emmy consideration in The Wheel of Time Season 3. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my favorite author, Stephen King. It's been a while since I've done a video like this. I previously released a top 10 scariest Stephen King stories video, which you can check out up here if you'd like to. And I got to thinking, hey, it's been a while since I've done Stephen King content on this channel, and it was kind of my bread and butter when I first started out about a year ago. And he's my favorite author of all time. I have a whole shelf dedicated just to Stephen King, and I plan on growing it as I grow my reading of Stephen King. I've read about 52 novels, I think, so far. And it's crazy to think of how prolific this man is, that you could read 52 novels of an author and still not have read his entire collection. But the thing that separates Stephen King, I think, from other horror authors is he actually went into things that were not really defined as horror. They could have scary elements. Maybe it's about the evil that people do to each other. But the horror elements of it are not as at the forefront as, say, like a Pet Sematary, an It with Pennywise the Clown. You know, these iconic characters that have kind of come through and become imbued in pop culture. So I figured this was a perfect time to talk about my favorite top 10 non-scary Stephen King stories. Now, I'm including short stories, novellas, and novels in this because I think, you know, he's a master at all three. And he writes in genres that are not just horror. He writes coming-of-age dramas. He writes stuff about marriage dynamics. He will write ghost stories, but really are kind of disguised as coming of age stories. He will write stories about being in a prison. He will write stories about a man who tries to catch this man in black as he fled across the desert to look for the Dark Tower. You know, there's all these different stories that he wrote. Fantasy, you know, sci-fi. He's going into all these different genres. Crime fiction is a new one. So I figured this was a perfect time to kind of delve into some of those. Now, before I start, I want to mention that these are my personal top 10. Of course, everyone's list is going to differ. And to that point, I would love to know if your list differs from mine, because I know that my top number one, which I've spoken to some people on our Discord, which is also linked below if you want to have those discussions. But I know some people are not as high on that book. So we're going to have differing opinions. That's the beauty of reading. And I think that's the beauty of seeing a man who is so prolific and has such a variety of catalog. Is there's something for everyone, but everyone's opinion is going to differ. So please let me know in the comments. If you like this kind of video, please like and subscribe. Always helps out the channel. If you hit the notification bell, at least you'll know when the new video comes out. And yeah, watch it through to the end if you can, even if you have it on in the background. It helps the YouTube algorithm make sure that it's being watched by the right people and pushing it out to the right people. So without further ado, let's jump in. Now, I want to mention an honorable mention, and I know this is kind of a table flipping kind of honorable mention, and I'll mention why in a moment, and that is The Green Mile. Now, the only reason this is probably not in my top 5 favorite non-scary Stephen King stories is I haven't read it, you guys. I think I read like a third of it when I was younger, and I was first delving into Stephen King. This was around when I was 15 years old, I think. And I was a sophomore in high school. Things were getting very busy with school, and I just didn't have time to finish it. And I just kind of fell off the radar on it. But the third that I read, I absolutely adored. The only reason I can't put it on this list is I haven't completed it, and it's been a while since it's been on. But I know that once I read it, it's probably going to hit that top 5, because just that third that I remember it being just so fantastic. But really, you know, it's kind of like a moving prison drama. It has a little bit of magical realism, I think you could say, in it. And it talks a little bit about the nature of justice and redemption as well. So it is very much not a horror novel. Of course, there's horror elements about a guy who's sentenced to death row. Did he do it? Did he not do it? and just kind of delving into his character as well, because it's a fascinating character to behold. And if you've seen the movie, I've heard the movie actually does the book justice as well. So I plan on at some point this year reading it and then watching it back to back and seeing how it compares for me. But that is my honorable mention. So let's dive into the top 10 in earnest now. So the first one I want to mention, number 10, is The Eyes of the Dragon. So this was actually Stephen King's kind of first foray into full-on fairy tale mode. He was going to follow that up with books like Fairy Tale, but he kind of started this journey because he wanted to write something that his daughter could read, because he wanted to be able to read it to his daughter, because he writes so many scary stories. He can't read his, little daughter about Cujo or something, right? Obviously. So he wanted to make a story for her. In this story, it's kind of very much a medieval setting. It's a classic good versus evil, and somebody who's been a little bit wrongfully accused and having to redeem themselves. So really, really good story. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's very short. I think it was like 300 pages or so. So it's something you could read in a couple sittings. That's how it was for me. I found myself riveted by it. It is very much YA in comparison to some of Stephen King's other books. But I will say the darkness of it was pretty dark. I mean, that's like, wow, you're going to read this to your daughter? But I think there's something in there for everyone. So I really feel like that deserves a top 10 spot. So that's number 10. Number 9 is a book I read recently. I actually read it during the pandemic, and I thought it was brilliant. I know some people are not as high on it because of its obvious connection to Stranger Things. That is The Institute, which came out in 2019. Now, The Institute is kind of about psychic children, kids whose parents are murdered in the night, and they're kidnapped and taken to this government facility for experimentation. Now, does that sound like the plot of, something like Stranger Things or something of that ilk, right? Well, like Stephen King's other stories, they have been influential in pop culture and have influenced, like, for example, I think about The Long Walk is another classic story that is now being adapted for as a film, but it had previously been an inspiration for Hunger Games, and you think about this Institute novel is kind of like an art reflecting on life reflecting back on art, because Stephen King had written a book called The Firestarter in, I want to say 1981, about a girl with powers to set fire to things and this whole government pursuit and everything, and that inspired Stranger Things. And then of course he was inspired by Stranger Things and wrote The Institute, so people feel like, oh, it's a little bit diluted, you're inspired by the thing that you inspired, it's like that whole thing. But I thought that the novel was paced brilliantly. There's something that happens at the very beginning. I won't spoil anything for you guys, but there's something that happens at the very beginning that you don't hear about at all for most of the novel, and then suddenly it comes back in the most brilliant of ways. I thought that the way Stephen King set that up was phenomenal. I love how the first half of the story is one type of story, and then it evolves into a different type of story. I thought don't sleep on this one. This is very underrated, I think. So The Institute is my number 9. Number 8 is one that I gotta say, when I was reading it, I wasn't as high on it when I first started reading it, but as it progressed, and also after I've had some distance from the book, because you know how sometimes you have some distance from a book and then you kind of change your thought process on how the book feels like evolves. And that was Lisi's story. So Lisi's story is kind of like a marriage drama in the sense that this woman is now a widow, her famous author husband has passed away, and she has to go and kind of close up his affairs, right? And the idea of like, what happens when you start uncovering things about your husband that you didn't necessarily know about? Are all secrets between a married couple, or are there some that are kept from the partner? And it kind of starts to evolve into a magical realism nightmare kind of story with supernatural influences. Trying to think about what else I could say about it, except that I would say that it has a really interesting analysis of creativity and also about memory and how memory can be distorted as you start to look at things with rose-colored glasses as time goes on, right? So I thought this book was really good. There were certain parts of it that I felt like had a little bit of fluff, but the story at its core was really worth reading. So, if you want some mid-2000s King, this is definitely one. Lisi stories for you. That was my number 8. Number 7, I actually just read, I can't remember if it was this year or last year, in 2025 or 2024 as of this taping. So this one is called Elevation. It is Stephen King's shortest novel, really is a novella, honestly. And I would say it's probably Stephen King has a mean streak when it comes to his characters sometimes. That's kind of what I love about him. But I would say that this one is a little bit more of a gentle story. A man starts mysteriously losing weight while staying the same size. Now, what would happen to the physics of a body like that? And kind of gives it away in the title, I guess you could say. But really, it's a question about connection, about community. And there's this lesbian couple that he's like, having this kind of tumultuous relationship with, that are his neighbors. And yeah, it's also about the art of letting go. I think it was a very poetic novel. It's about what happens when you are dealt with a blow like that you're dealing with something that could or could not be fatal. How would that change your worldview? How would that change the way you deal with other people? And how would that change how you deal with yourself? And I think it's a beautiful, poignant tale. And it's a quick read. I read it in one sitting, actually, because it was that riveting for me. I know some people are not as high on this book, but I think if you go into it going, I don't want Classic King, I want you to give me something else, a wild card, then I think Elevation might be for you. That's my number 7. Number 6 is another short book, you guys, and one that would be probably in his crime fiction series of books that he's been doing as of late, and this one is called Joyland. So this takes place in the 1970s. It's got a bit of the 70s nostalgia, and it's about a kid who gets a summer job working at a carnival. And it's his summer. I feel like it was right after his senior year before he goes to college. So it's this coming of age drama. It's got a little bit of ghost story in it. It's got a little bit of a coming of age arc. And there's a sadness to it, but there's also poignancy. There's suspense as well. It's got a little bit of a thriller element, but it's not necessarily overtly a horror book. Does that make sense? So there are supernatural forces at work, but of course, that is not necessarily at the forefront as much as it is about this kid getting older and losing his innocence and trying to figure out what does he want to do with his life. So I thought that book was really, really nice as well. And it's a quick read again as well. So Joyland is my number 6. Now, number 5 is actually book 1 of a trilogy and probably the darkest one on this list. A man, a crazy psycho killer, drives his car, his Mercedes, into a group of people waiting outside for like Black Friday sales or something like that, and kills like 15 people. And there's a retired cop, Bill Hodges, or he's on the verge of retirement, I think. And he's trying to solve this case. It's a game of cat and mouse. You're first introduced to one of King's favorite characters, Holly, in this book. And, it's hard to pick which of the 3 I liked best, because I would argue the second book, Finders Keepers, is even better. But the first one kind of like sets up this killer in a really interesting way, sets up all the characters, sets all the pieces on the chessboard. And it is pretty gritty crime fiction. The relationship between the killer and his mom is pretty harrowing. Bill Hodges is such an endearing character. You get to meet, I think, Jerome in this book. You get to meet Holly. It's some great characters, basically. Side characters. Everyone's very memorable. And that's one thing I really love about it. So, again, not outright horror. It's more crime fiction. But if you want to dive into crime fiction, then I would say if you had to choose one book to represent King's works, then it would be Mr. Mercedes. And that's coming up at my number 5. Number 4 is a novella. And this one is called The Body. This was adapted into an 80s film called Stand By Me, which did very well, about these kids who hear about this dead body and they want to go see it for themselves. And thus begins the adventure that's going to change all of their lives. It's bittersweet. It's got a coming of age story. It's classic coming of age and really classic 80s King as well. Every character is very memorable in this. You kind of feel this ragtag group of friends who are trying to take this journey, walking all the way down to where this dead body is, and it's like miles and miles, so they go on all sorts of adventures as that happens. there's a little bit of magical realism, but really the emphasis is on that coming of age and the friendship dynamics, you know, the loss of innocence and getting older. It's like the first time you see a dead body as a kid would probably be one of those seminal moments that sticks in your mind, right? That it's like, oh, that is the moment that we all decided, you know, like we all grew up, right? So that book was fantastic. I really enjoyed this one a lot. And if you've seen Stand By Me, you know why this book is good. So definitely check out the original source material. Number 4 is The Body. Number 3 is a beloved literary classic. Now this one was also adapted into a movie called The Shawshank Redemption. And of course I'm talking about another novella, Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption. It's kind of a prison escape story. It is about the camaraderie of the different prison inmates, and it really gives you an idea of what prison life is like. There's a grittiness to it. There's an underlying sense of like, this is what it would feel like to be doing hard time, you know, in a prison at that time. I forget when this takes place. I think it was in the 40s or 50s. But, you know, you could imagine what prison was like back then. And the idea of patience, also biding your time to look for the perfect opportunity to take your life in your own hands. And this one particular character that is kind of the centerpiece of the story, who I think, you know, reflects a lot of like, from what I remember of Green Mile, the main character, the one who is sentenced in that story also has something different about them that sets them apart from the other inmates. So that's kind of that little parallel that I noticed with Stephen King, is he'll find an idea and he'll try to express it through these different stories. So I gotta say, this book was spectacular. This novella was phenomenal. I mean, if you've seen the movie, you know why it's so great, but the source material is fantastic as well. So I highly recommend you check it out. That is coming in at my number 3. So let's go to number 2. Now, the last two are really hard to kind of choose because there are so many other great non-scary Stephen King stories. The second one is particularly hard because it's going to actually be a book from the Dark Tower series. Now, how do you pick 1 out of 7? Well, it's very difficult. Let me tell you. I tried to think about this one, and I eventually landed on the book that really changed it all for me and kind of expanded my worldview. And it is often touted as the high point of the Dark Tower series. And it is also where the Dark Tower series starts getting really, really weird. I'm talking about talking trains. I'm talking about Gasher. I'm talking about the TikTok man. And I'm talking about the Quartet. And of course, I'm talking about book 3, The Wastelands. You probably have no idea what I'm talking about if you haven't read it, but this is kind of where the main 4 characters that are going to follow us through the rest of the series all come together for the first time. And you start to see a little bit of that acid trip through fantasy that Stephen King kind of became known for in this series come to full-fledged, you know, hold. You hear about, like I mentioned, Blaine, the talking train, you know, stuff that you would never see in any other fantasy novel. Stephen King takes the risks because he's not beholden to the genre. You know, you could tell he obviously must have read Lord of the Rings, but that's about it. And so he blends in horror, he blends in historical fiction, he'll blend in, you know, just weird pop culture references. I don't want to spoil any more than that because I feel like anything more would unravel the mystery of the Dark Tower, and I think that would be doing a grave injustice to anybody's reading experience, because for me, the Dark Tower unfolded like a long mystery from beginning to end. And I would never want to take that away from anyone. But I will say, if you were lukewarm on the first 2 books, give that third one a try and then decide if the series is for you or not. Because to me, the third book was firing on all cylinders. And there's certain even book references that I have found those original copies of books that they mention in that particular book. So I don't know, just a fantastic acid trip through fantasy, really highly enjoyable. And really would, you know, changed my worldview personally. So that one is book 3 of The Dark Tower by Stephen King, The Wastelands. Now, before I get to the number 1, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you all being here. It really makes a huge difference having a community of book addicts like myself, being able to watch these videos, talk about it in Discord, talk about it on the FABLE if you're doing any other read-alongs and stuff. So I just want to mention those resources are down below for you if you want to check any of those out. And we'd love to have you. You know, the more the merrier, because we love having conversations with each other and we develop real friendships and support groups through that. So if you like this kind of video, please like and subscribe. And now on to the number one choice. So anyone who knows me, it might not be the biggest surprise in the world, but to me, I thought that a book that was kind of 4 decades in the making for Stephen King, a book that blends political thriller with time travel paradoxes, sci-fi, horror, a love story for the ages. I mean, I'm talking about 11/22/63. Now, this was a book that came out in 2011. It's about a guy who tries to go back in time to stop the Kennedy assassination because it is posited in the book that that was a real turning point in American history. And what would have happened if that event had never happened? You know, would all the things that came afterwards, you know, LBJ, the war in Vietnam, Nixon, and so on and so forth, would those things have happened the way they would have? Well, there's only one way to find out, is to go back in time and change it. Now, here's the catch. The guy can only go back to a specific day in 1958. So he would have to live there. He would have to work there and wait and bide his time till that fateful day when he could take action. Now, if he missed, he could always go back, but he keeps getting older and time keeps moving on. And what if time doesn't want it to be changed? I mean, it's just wonderful. And I'm not even a romance guy, but this romance in this book just got me. And Stephen King has always been known as having, you know, hit or miss endings. That's always a gripe by casual fans of Stephen King. Not constant readers like myself, of course, but I will say that this is probably one of Stephen King's best endings. He lands the ending like no other in this book. To me, it's the perfect novel, and it is perfectly paced at like 700 pages or whatever it is. So that is my number one. I would love to know from you all, did you have any differences to this list? Anything you would change? Anything that you think that is like, come on, you can't have this on the top 10. This sucks or whatever. Or, oh, why don't you have this a little bit higher? Let me know. I always like to hear from you in the comments. It's always fun to chat with you all. And I really appreciate you being here. You know, we are a strong community of book addicts, like I said, and Stephen King fans, of course. And of course, fans of fantasy and sci-fi, horror, historical fiction, and everything in between. So feel free to check out the other videos if you're new here. And I'm Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem. Be good to each other. Be good to yourselves. And I'll see you, as always, on the next video. Take care.